Hi, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining. Today it's sort of a personal talk because it was very difficult for me writing papers a while ago, and I'm not even good at writing postcards. Well, I'm not sure whether postcards still exist. Today it's all text messaging, I guess. So anyway, welcome to how to make successfully writing a paper easy and maybe even fun. This is a presentation that I originally intended for the group here in Cologne. So for my very close co-workers whom I meet day to day. Then I was asked whether I could share this, and I'm happy to do so. My name is Prof Cornely, University of Cologne and University Hospital. What I do is clinical infectious diseases, clinical trials, as well as seeing patients with infections. Often that is fungal infections, but it might be others as well. And going right into the topic, you may have heard what I have heard, and that is that during the COVID pandemic, well, that's a fact, more articles were written than ever before. And you may have heard that as a possible explanation that researchers who were not able to enter their lab quarantine had more time to write. That is something that I heard often. I'm not really sure whether that is true. And I mean, theoretically it is, but for clinicians, certainly that was not true because we were all working in the hospitals with all these COVID patients. So I believe that researchers increased their efficiency in writing and in working. At least that I would hear, I would much more like that explanation than the first explanation. And so before I go into what I know is one way of writing articles and how it works, and there must be other ways too, but one way how it works, then I'd like to share with you a few thoughts on why I do actually not like writing manuscripts. You may say that's kind of funny because that group publishes like one paper a week or every 5 days recently over the last 2-3 years. However, it is first of all really burdensome. Okay, so it's burdensome, and what I do not like is a piece of white paper, and if it were just a white rectangle on my screen, I don't like it because it's I feel it's staring at me and it is intimidating, and I don't know how to start, and I was never taught how to write. So this is all what we learning by doing did over the last 25 or 30 or so years. And there were no writing courses at my medical school. We now have a tiny little one for about 10 students, 10 to 15 students, and we run that twice a year. And so one thing that you may have felt too is if I start writing plain text, so sit down and write that article type of situation, then I really must rewrite it multiple times. So I need a better plan than just sitting down and writing it. So and I do not like text that I have written. It feels awkward to read my own text, and I don't like it. And if I like it, then 2 days later I stopped liking it and I rewrite it again. So that's not ideal. It feels a bit like looking at yourself on a video screen, and maybe that is really an outdated comparison because it makes you feel really uncomfortable. However, I don't know whether that is still the case with everybody having a camera in his pocket and all the selfies, etc., that became common. So writing certainly is time consuming, and if the writing process is interrupted, then I need, with every work, I really need to fully concentrate. I need really time to get on route again, and that adds to the burden, and hospitals. I mean, that's certainly something that you know very well. If you work in a hospital, hospitals are defined by interruptions rather than by continuity. So writing is extremely burdensome. And having said that, so what's the way out of this setting, of this problem, of this challenge? And well, what made me like writing and the writing process is I structure that thread, that staring paper. I try to fill it with some structure, and then it loses its power over me, and I can really then work bit by bit and piece by piece and produce a text. Often I do not write these papers just alone, but there is a group of people who will be co-authors, or I might be a co-author for them. So if you share files, then what we do is we never want to work in parallel, so that two people work on the same. There are some electronic solutions for that. They are not absolutely perfect, and if you're so much used to use Microsoft Word as the tool, then it looks slightly different with all the online things like OneDrive or whatever you name it, Google, etc. So multiple wonderful opportunities to use these shared drives and shared files. However, often it really comes down to this, and we record the session, so you don't actually need to make notes if you feel you should, but this is the structure of a file. So whenever you would receive a file from me, it looks like this. So it's a convention that here at the Institute of Translational Research everybody follows. First is that the text needs to express, you need to have an idea what's in there. Okay, so it should not be file or so, or article or something. It should be the name of the study, for example, and here what file of that study is it. It's the master protocol. It could be just the manuscript, main manuscript or something could stand there as well. So project name, document name, then the date when that file was saved. So today, so to say, and then separated by underscores, because some computers don't like it if you have a space in there. It's the initials of the authors and the owner of the manuscript. So the person who will finally be the first author and started the whole process, etc., will actually be the owner of the manuscript, the only person to be allowed to change the date. And it should be changed every day, where there is a day that somebody was working on that file, because otherwise the names get really, really long. And then it might be that the files on your in a folder to that project look like this. So first draft, and then it's reviewed. On the left is the explanation, okay, and right is the file name. So don't rely on the actual safe dated time stamp, but put it in the file name as well, because then it will nicely sort itself by the name and at the same time chronologically. Chronological order is super important. I'll come back to that, because it may be actually the number one principle, or one out of two important principles. Before I do so, let's have a look at some default settings. I put them in Microsoft Word. I'm sure there are other programs, but many people use Microsoft Word. So I use them as a template. So I put all the formats in a blank page, and then I save it as a template. And I can open the template without changing the settings, and but a new file will be created. So you select the language, for example, English, depending on like the journal or the audience the file is meant for, or the manuscript or finally article is meant for. And you need to decide which version of English you take, because that depends on the target German. My favorite paragraph settings, that's really into detail now, and this is before I have 0 points and after I have 6 points, because then I never need an empty line, because I do have that spacing there already. Line spacing itself would be 1.5, and then something really important is that all fonts that you use, they must match each other, otherwise it looks weird. So they all should be either with these little hands and feet, like the T of times or the N of new or Roman. That's a font with serif, which is a French word, I guess. And if there are no such serifs, then you are these very technically looking Arial or Calibri. Usually I go for a size 11 there, and for a size 12 a little bit higher for the ones with the serifs. But that might be due to my myopia. So anyway, and then you would likely use EndNote or other reference manager programs. And if you do so, and if the text is a bit longer, switch off the instant formatting, because it drives you nuts. If you are writing on a long text, maybe a guideline or something, then you're sitting there and can't work, because the program always automatically restarts that formatting, which is superfluous, because it's okay to do that at the end of a work session. So some general rules. And you can see in the middle of the slide that chronology is in bold. So some general rules. Let's start with tense. Stick to the same tense. We all learned that at school, right? If we had English lessons there, and remember these. So usually that's simple past, and that should be done throughout the article. And it's really worth, specifically for non-native speakers like me. It's always worth, at the end, read your article once again. When you really think you are done, you're ready, everything's wonderful, you can upload. If there is time to wait for one day, and then read it again with fresh eyes and see whether the tense really was always the right tense chosen. Chronology. That's the one secret of one of the two most important aspects here. If you follow, whatever you do should be presented in a chronology. So, for example, you would always describe the diagnostic procedures before you talk about treatment. Like, that's chronology. So much easier to understand for the reader or for the audience. You would describe symptoms and report findings of previous studies, etc. All that is chronology. And in a statistical text, that is something that we went through with a young doctor. I went through with a young doctor at the University Hospital here. We had a statistics text, and I had to resort the information in there so that the base parameters came first, and then the sample size estimation came last, and because that's the result. So it's chronology in multiple fashions. There's alphanumeric order. When you list equally ranked objects, for example, 5 drug names, then make sure that they are in alphabetical or alphanumeric order. There's an easy example here. If all echinocandins, hey, there's a typo. Okay, I have to correct this one later. That's German. So if all echinocandins are listed, just because they belong to that class, and you would find review articles where that is the case, then there are 4 out there, or 3 and 1 soon, the risofungin. So you would sort them in alphabetical order, unless you want to express some specific sequence and have a good reason why something is first and some other is last. So if there is no good reason for that, then don't make your audience or your readership think about, why is it this order? So the answer should always be either alphabetical, or there is a reason. If there is a reason, then state the reason. but it should not be unintentionally a different sequence from alphanumeric because it's not logical, right? And if you ever get a paper back from a reviewer, and that is one of the reviewer comments, maybe I was the reviewer. Some more general rules, numbers and figures. So numbers 1 to 13 are written in full. Don't ask me why. From 14 onwards, it's actual numbers. So I've no clue why that is. Maybe there is some explanation. Maybe one of you knows the explanation. Then I would be happy to learn that. And don't start a phrase with a number. You would say, we all know that, but actually you see that quite often that it's still being done. And it apparently is not the best way to do it. So don't start it with a number. Then the figures. All text should likely be in bold and then dark on bright background or bright on dark background so that you get a lot of contrast there. And if you're using colors, then of course choose colors wisely. And think of your male readership, of everybody with only one X chromosome. They are at higher risk of not being in the position to see all the colors as you might see them. And I can tell you, I know what I'm talking of here. And when sending your draft to co-authors, enhance track changes because that makes your life easier and the life of the co-author as well. Use track changes for any relevant changes, not necessarily for punctuation. If there is just a little comma here and there, you just put it in and there is no need to discuss it, I guess. And if there is more than one round of exchange, then remove all resolved comments that came back to you. If it's resolved, remove it because it's distracting, and so that it again increases efficiency. Well, one other slide on general rules, and I hope you don't expect today any figures. There's no figures, there's no nice images, all text. Okay, so the only colorful thing here is, and even I am blue and white today. So anyway, so there's the general rule. What you do. So you open an empty Word document. Of course, then write down the headers. That's always a good start because now the paper cannot stare at you because you wrote down the headers, and that is always the same headers. Okay, so you will have the introduction, methods, the results and discussion, and right at the top, the authors, of course, and the title might be even the first line. Maybe it's a working title and you refine it in the process. So when you wrote down the headers, you would begin drafting the introduction. And once the introduction is finished, and the other parts would follow. Now, how to do the introduction? So when writing, use bullet points. I mean, I have to use bullet points. I need them to help me. So you could use bullet points, and do not produce full sentences at that stage, but enter your ideas. And then once you are done and you are tired now and you need to do something else, you can route it to the last author at any stage you feel appropriate, and somebody else now will work on this thing while you do something else, and then it will come back, and so you get into the flow, and it goes ping pong between the different authors. Very helpful because it's always encouraging to see that that's working on the same thing, and you all share the success then. So what you can do, you can type all your ideas that you want to mention under the headers. So if you're writing the introduction and then you think of something, oh, that's a great result, I don't want to miss that one, certainly want to address that result in the results section, or you get some idea of something that you want to mention in the discussion. Since the headers are there, you can just jump there, make a little note there, so nothing will be lost, and then you go back to that introduction part, for example, that you're currently working on. Once you have everything expressed, you think there's everything there that should be part of the introduction, then you could do a reread of the bullet points, and then you bring them into a logical, mostly that is chronological order, again, chronology, and that chronological order could be from whosever perspective. It might be a patient's perspective or a pathogen's perspective or a molecule, whatever. I don't know what you write about. So it could be, but if you wouldn't describe a molecule, the development of a molecule in a chemist wouldn't describe it starting from the end. It likely would tell you how they build that structure. It just helps them with the flow, and when it helps with the flow, then it helps the reader understand. And when do people read your papers? At night, at 2 a.m. or something. So make their life easy with coming with a clear structure in your text. Once that is done, you have your nice chronological, let's say, order. Then you could convert the bullets into one sentence each, but keep them separate. Go through it again, whether you still like the flow. And if that is the case, then remove the bullets in favor of plain text. Then you might find your little connectors, how to make it flow nicely into the next sentence. So that's the other principle, the general rule. The other principle, I'll come back to that one because it's so important. Let's go through the structure itself. So, introduction. Length should not be more than 1 page. And what about the references? So, no sentence in the introduction should come without a reference. And because you need to invite your readers to that journey through your article with starting with something that they know or that they can connect to, or they could look up whether what you write in your introduction is true or not, and where is the base for that, and that's why there need to be references. Use as few references as possible, ideally only 1 reference per argument, not per sentence, but per argument. Anyway, your sentence should be short so that it might be the same whether a sentence or argument. And I discourage my group from using reviews or guidelines or books, but rather search for the original publication, so the original source of the information. Because I learned that when citing a review, and I found, oh, that's interesting, and I went for the reference that was coming with that sentence in the review, and it was another review paper. And then I looked up that reference, and it was another one. I looked up that reference. It didn't exist. So actually, 3 authors believed in what was in the review paper they cited. But if you really went back to the original root information, you couldn't find it. So it was either misspelled in the reference or simply non-existent, some sort of mistake made by the first person writing the first review. So that should not happen to you, and therefore always go back to the original publication. And if a manuscript or a study idea results from previous work of your own group, then occasionally we, funny enough, forget to cite our work, which doesn't make sense because we build our current paper on what we did before. So we need to, just to be sure that we didn't miss anything, need to go through the publications of the group on that same topic and then evaluate whether there is a suitable fit. And if that is the case, then it should be cited because that is where the work comes from and builds. So next chapter, so to say, is patients and methods. And but once you accomplished introduction, you should be allowed to rest and work on patients and methods only in the next break or next day. Generally, there are no citations in this section. And as you know, as we all know, there is no rule without exception. So the exceptions are methodologically relevant citations, lab methods, guideline methodology or so. That is absolutely reasonable to not reiterate everything, but to cite that procedure, that method that has been published before, and you say this has been published before. We did it like we did it last time, and then there is the paper. And But make sure if you use the same method in a prior paper or publish a study program, that you refer to such publication, yes, and give only reduced information in the methods because it saves on your word count. So you have more word count then to spend on your results and on the discussion. If you repeat parts of the methods verbatim as they were in your other paper, then your manuscript that you're writing might get flagged for potential plagiarism because the software that is being used by the publishing houses is very technical. So it might flag just because there is a certain percentage of words occurring in the identical sequence in your prior or any other prior publication. So if you follow these recommendations for the methods, then you are not you don't have a flagged publication for no reason. Results. Again, no citations in this section. If you feel that there should be a citation, then think about whether that really is a result or would rather be part of your introduction or one of these exceptions in the methods. And there is a general rule: avoid redundancy between text and tables. Maybe this is less relevant nowadays and less relevant in the future. It could be that it's becoming less relevant because we have more and more journals that are only electronic, and whether it's 100 words or one table or figure more might not be that relevant for the journal. But in general, avoid redundancy. Unless you have a good reason, it's perfectly okay to present a result twice if it's really important and you want to make that point that you describe it in the text and you do have it in figure. Because what often happens is that people would take that figure and use it on a slide, and then the figure should be self-explaining, and of course you draw your attention to your key results if they are in text and in a figure. So choose your figures wisely. Usually you don't have more than 5 or so. Right? Discussion. If you discuss the key findings of the present study, then that's what readers want to see there, and that should be done by comparison to published literature. Don't cite names of authors like Smith said this and that. Well, it's not necessarily the best way to move forward. Cite their studies, and that would then be a citation and a corresponding reference. Be decent. Don't state this is the largest, best, only sample on this and all other planets. So you shouldn't say that. So, and actually, to the best of our knowledge, this is whatever is not a very important. It's a loss of word. Okay, so you can save these 8 words as part of a reasonable argument of something that you really want to get across. So the value of our work is judged by our peers in the end, right? So by our readers and our peer reviewers. Each paragraph should start with a key finding and the main finding. If there is one main finding, then that you want to have at the beginning of the first paragraph. Okay? Ideally, that would be one crisp sentence. Sometimes it's not as easy, so then that sentence might be a bit longer, or you put it in a few lines of a paragraph, but make sure that you don't repeat before there is a first reference in the discussion. That's not very good. You need a certain density of references in the discussion. Ideally, every sentence would come with a reference or report on your findings. The limitations, there is no study without limitations. So the limitations should be, or it's a good way to present them in the last but one paragraph. And the last paragraph should be the conclusion. Be careful that the conclusion is not too long. So really focus on something that's really important. And usually that would correspond to that first sentence in the discussion and would address the same key finding. And maybe even which direction to go from here, but that should not be too much expanded, but mostly it's not appropriate to do so. Sometimes it is. And now you may wonder why abstract is only coming here. Well, we write abstracts only once the article is done, because otherwise we have to rewrite the abstract all the time, and that is not fun. So write the abstract only after finishing all other text parts of the article. And usually the abstract is structured, but it depends on the target journal. Some are structured, others are not. And if there is a structure, then it would roughly follow. There might be some different wording there, roughly follow background objectives. Sometimes that's together one part, patients or patients' methods, results, conclusion. That would usually be the structure of an abstract. I love structured abstracts because I have to admit that sometimes I look at the title, the conclusion, and then I read the middle part. But that is, of course, not a recommendation. That is just what I occasionally do. There's something interesting to learn about keywords. I learned that from some journal. I'm not sure from which one. You always ask for keywords, right? So 5 keywords or something would be a standard type of number of keywords. The purpose of the keywords is that people find your article when they do literature search. So usually you do not need to use words that are in your manuscript title anyway, because that will be part of a field that is being searched anyway. So you don't need these again. So you could go for 5 or whatever the number the journal asks you for, of 5, let's say 5 keywords, but you don't need to repeat what's in the title. References is, of course, an important part. Citation style depends on the journal, of course. For internal work or funding proposals where nobody tells you which reference style should be used, we usually go for the generic Vancouver. That's always a good choice. There might be others, and basically in these situations you could just use what you like most, but Vancouver is something that is very often used, and eyes are used to it. The citation in the text should, either be before the full stop, and it should always be at the end of a phrase and not somewhere in the middle. Maybe it's after the full stop, could be. Depends on the journal. One thing is important, that you do it consistently, because then it can be automatically adjusted by reference manager programs. Finally, so I said no tables, no figures in this talk, but I will talk about figures and a little bit more. So as alluded to a moment ago, make figures standalone. So they should have a title that is describing what's on the figure. So because that is what will happen. People will cut and paste the figure, and ideally with the title, with the legend, the entire thing, and use them for their talk about the topic. And all abbreviations in a table figure need to be explained in the legend or at the in the footer of that non-text part of your article. Images should use color as appropriate, and an example for a table title that I find not very informative is patient characteristics. Okay, I mean, yeah, it's patient characteristics, but you could add a bit more characteristics of 53 patients with disease X. Okay, then you know a bit more already. And it doesn't cost word count. It's service to the reader. It makes the whole thing more transparent, even in that detail. Then going back to that second line, the first was the title, the line after the title, co-authorship or authorship. In other fields, there is no discussion. There is always only one author in archaeology or so. They usually don't have 5 authors, but that's different in our fields, I guess. And the person writing the paper is the first author. So there is no Smith wrote the paper, but Miller is the first author. That is really unusual, and I would actually not even know what the reason should be behind that. So the principal investigator or main other researcher, there might be a tandem of 2 people, and they are just next to each other. It's not that one is the superior to the other or anything. So the principal investigator or other main researcher is the last author in most systems, and that is how we do it. And then in the middle, there are all the sub-investigators, project management, if there was project management, statistician, data manager. So this comes from a clinical trial perspective, right? But it's easily transferable to other settings and studies. External sub-investigators as well, of course. And then the acknowledgements might have the essential contributors, technical support, study nurses. When a project is conceived, so you have an idea of what you want to do. And next thing is that you think about what do you need to run that study, to write that paper, to work on this topic. And you may think of people that you need and that you want to ask and invite whether they want to work with you. As soon as somebody says, "Oh yeah, I want to be part of this," and you could open that plain white file where there is nothing on there, only the working title, you're expressing your idea, and those people who said they want to help you and work with you, write down their names. If you do that consistently, you will never forget any co-author, because that's really terrible if you forget a co-author and then published in good faith, and then co-author says, "Hey, I saw this paper, and why didn't you mention me? Why didn't you ask me? You asked me at the beginning." So that really we all want to avoid, because it's really embarrassing, and it should just not happen. And of course, things still happen, but then you have to negotiate with the journal and tell them that you need a erratum in the author byline, quite a complex procedure that would start. Ideally, you collect the ORCID ID. I find it very helpful, and we now have a long table with all the ORCID ID numbers or identifiers from all our co-authors, and of course there are always new co-authors then co-workers that are being entered or added to that list. This is just a little part of that list, 3 people from Cologne. Now, the target journal, that is something that needs to be selected. So ideally before drafting the final manuscript, because then you can use their author instructions for the formatting. And how we do this, and I actually, this morning I was asked, well, mycologists, it's a journal I work for. So mycologists, they just had that publication on something with scedosporium, apparently about 3 months ago. And the colleague from Switzerland said, "I fainted when I saw this, because it's exactly the same title, roughly, of what we were working on. And we wanted to submit to mycologists too." That was sort of a pre-submission inquiry, whether it's a suitable publication for the journal, because we just had something on that very same topic. So that might be discouraging. I encourage to see it, because it's never the same paper. And so cite or look in your at the web page of the target journal and check whether there were any recent articles on your publication topic. If so, and it's certainly appropriate to cite them, because otherwise the editor stuff will be a bit concerned that you didn't read the recent literature and cite it in your publication. And follow the author guidelines, of course, in detail. And the citation style depends on the journal, mentioned that already. And that is in part, or is part of the author instructions. And if you don't follow the author instructions, that may lead to rejection, which is frustrating and means more work. So you rather adapt to the author instructions of the target journal, and if something's rejected, then of the next target journal. So coming almost to the end of my presentation, I'd like to share this other highly important aspect. Chronology was the one. This is the other one. Slice your work into small packages, into something that you can achieve. When beginning a new project that will lead to a manuscript, open that empty Word document, write down the headers, write down the names of people involved, collect all your thoughts and note them down in that document. It could be right in the middle of the night that you have some ideas. So make sure that next to your bed, there's something where you can write it down, okay? And then you can sleep again. Otherwise, it might keep you awake. And then on the next location, you enter that thought at the appropriate position in your article to be developed. Use bullet points at the beginning when you start the writing process, because it's easier to change the order of bullet points than of a full text. Do not produce full sentences at this stage. Sort then all the bullets in the individual parts. So let's say introduction, for example, bring in chronological order. Convert the bullets into one sentence each. Sort all the bullets in chronological order again, if they are no longer in chronological order, or if you find a better flow for that text part. Connect the sentences to make them flow. Remove the bullets in favor then of plain text. And if you go through these individual steps, you could say, oh boy, that's like 11 steps just for the introduction or for these parts. However, what it really does, it slices this big work of a manuscript so thin that you can improve one of these slices. Even if you're tired, you might be able, even after a night shift, you have these 2 hours where you still feel fresh before you fall into your bed. So you can still work a little bit on this, enter 1 or 2 or 3 manuscripts that you want to cite and put them in the right position with half a sentence. And there is no necessity that you sit down and write the entire article in one session. I can't do that. I mean, there are people who can do that. I'm certainly not one of them. Well, with that, that's as easy as it is. Thank you very much for joining today. I'm happy to take questions, and I hand over, so to say, to Janina Leckler and Fiona Stewart, who are helping me today, and kept an eye on the chat, etc. So, are there any questions?
Yes, there are some questions in the Q&A chat. I don't know if you want to open it.
Yeah, sure. I stopped sharing, and the Q&A. Oh, 15 are there. So let's see. And are you using versioning tools like JIT rather than file names? Well, actually not, but I'm quite old, so it could be that there is better ways of doing what I just went through. So need to look at that. LaTeX, I haven't used that. Well, I have, but it's really a long time ago, 30 years ago or so. It depends a bit on what you, well, back then it was the best program for mathematical text and formulas, because it allowed formatting where text programs did not. What kind of automation tools are used to make some tedious parts more efficient? I don't understand the question, actually. So maybe you could expand on that. Have you used ChatGPT? No, I haven't, but maybe maybe I should. I'm still waiting for the younger people in my group to come up with some ChatGPT innovations, and so that I can learn from them. How do you protect your work from hardware failures? Oh yeah, indeed. So whatever is on my laptop computer will be automatically saved to a disk station. And of course, usually one would use one of these cloud solutions, and we work with these too. And I have to say that I didn't lose anything recently. So I try to be online with my laptop wherever I can. And if it's just for 5 minutes in between at the airport or something. So that the work that I produced while on that flight would be saved. Are you using Zettelkasten or something else? That's a nice German word. I doubt that there is. I don't know whether there is an English expression for that. Or something else outside of the dock to gather and connect your ideas. I have to admit I don't. Likely I could work much better than with using all these things. No, I haven't, but happy to learn about Zettelkasten. I love it. And what activities do you do explicitly to inject some fun into the process? Well, I'm not a very sad person, I guess, and the fun is if things move quickly. So I like to bring things in order, chronological often, and I like to throw half-written text or some bullets at co-workers. And then it's fun if they understood the direction I wanted to go to, or if they correct that direction. So it's just the progress of the work is fun. I hope that's enough. For me, it's enough. And producing new data, that's great too. So you mentioned that we should always find the original source. Yeah. The problem is that the access to the original source is often denied and cannot be accessed through the University of, or VPN. Can I add the source without being able to check it? Well, I would rather recommend to email the person who wrote the review and share your concern. I can't access that article, or you email the author of that article that you want to access. And if it's not really, really old, then usually there should be an email address, and often that helps. Often that helps. So if it's in the fungal field, you could even ask the team over here. But usually we find it, and if it were in a seminar paper with a limited word count, for example, 6,000 words, which is of course quite something. That's 2 articles, so to say. Do you include or exclude in-text citation when counting words? Well, it depends on the recipient, right? So who's the one receiving that text? But I would not count in-text citation. And I always find it a bit difficult to count the words there if it is in-text citation. I don't like in-text citation. I really am in favor of a number, and then you can look it up, which is very easy, specifically if it's all electronic. But to stay strictly with the question, I don't count the in-text citation. When speaking of header in the structure of the manuscript, that can be used in putting down bullet for the writing. Does this mean the title of the paper? The header actually is the section header practically. It's more the structure of the, so it's the headers, that is, of course, that can be misunderstood. So The header is not the title of the paper, but the header is the word introduction and methods and results, etc. And of course, there might be subheaders there. Don't necessarily submit a paper with 20 subheaders. So, but the ones that you always need is intro, methods, results, and discussion. And so thank you for pointing that one out. It's when I say header, it doesn't always only refer to the title of the entire manuscript. Is there something like shared first author? Yes, there is shared first, there is shared last. It might be two, it might be more than two. Equal contribution statements, we see that all the time on papers. We do that too, and it depends a bit on all the purposes that the paper would fulfill. So if it is part of a PhD thesis or the accomplishments to become a PhD, then it might be, or other doctorate, then make sure what exactly are the requirements and whether it's allowed or not. So at my university, shared first and shared last are felt appropriate because it reflects the way people work together. It's not that somebody's sitting just on a very, very alone there for years and then coming up with a wonderful paper. That's not exactly what we do at the medical faculty. And so there's another one. You extended a long list of contributions to articles that could be authors. According to the international guidelines, a large part of them do not meet the criteria of authorship. The number of authors who did not really contribute to the article is ethically problematic, isn't it? Well, yeah, that's a dilemma. I know what you mean. However, following the international guidelines of defining an author, if you fall short of fulfilling these criteria, but you feel that that person should be more than just be mentioned in the acknowledgement, what you can do is you could do group or contributing authors, and many journals now allow this, and sometimes you have to ask because you don't find it in the guidelines. I prefer journals who have that section. For example, certainly that is the case with the New England Journal, and it's the case with the Lancet family of journals and many others as well. So there is something in between fulfilling all the criteria for authorship versus being mentioned in the acknowledgement. There is something in between, that's the contributing authors. Sometimes there is different phrase for that, but contributing authorship is something that I saw quite frequently. Next one. If I have colleagues, not students, writing paper with me and we all write all together, but I lead the process and invest more than others, where should I put myself on the article, first or last author, and where should be the second person who also put a lot of effort more than others? Yeah, so these two persons should be first and last. Who's first and who's last of these two, that's up to you. Whether that other person works in a system where last author does count less than second author, then maybe it's worth discussing whether that other author, that second most working or accomplishing author, should be the second author. That is certainly, it depends on the system you work in and what the publication finally is, so to say, used for, the purposes it needs to fulfill in an academic meaning. I feel that the next one is pretty close to that one. And it's the prestigious status of the authors in a manuscript change according to profession. That's true. Medicine, it's first and last. In other professions, sometimes it's first and second. Yeah, exactly. I didn't read that before, but it's what do you think about equal contribution? Yeah, I think I addressed these important points when answering to other questions. Please comment about slicing versus salami science. No, I'm not sure what salami science is. But what we should slice is the work, not the science. So if your question goes in the direction of the least publishable result, so you don't want that. And the least publishable result doesn't bring you into good journals, right? Because it's only half stories told then. I repeat all these questions, right, so that you know what I'm looking at, because that Q&A section is not visible for everybody, but only for the hosts and some whatever some subgroups of the audience. And so the next one, can you give any recommendations on as how to navigate literature prior to writing intro and discussion? Well, you would do your literature search just on PubMed, is what we usually do, and you do your literature search, you see what's there. You would rather focus on original articles. You can tick these boxes there, and you narrow it really down to by the criteria to the few things that are really important. And if you narrowed it down so that you really have a dry list there with nothing else, then you of course be a bit more liberal. And that is how I would say I navigate the literature. Then you read the abstract to find whether it's really important or whether it only looked good by the title, and that is how I accumulate the literature. Usually, before you write the paper, you already know what has been published, because it's the basis that your project is built on. Advice for using applications that help paraphrase sentences. Never done that. That goes in the direction of ChatGPT. I'm not sure. I've never done that. So unfortunately, no advice from me. What about using AI applications for paraphrasing? Same thing. Yeah, I'm not. It takes out the fun of all the process, right? So maybe that's the future, but it's not for me. It's not the present. How do you decide if there is enough material for a paper, and when is it allowed to split experiments into several papers? Yeah, with more and more journals only being electronic, there's no limit to the online supplement material, so everything could be in one paper. I can only say if it's a story, if it's a story that you tell, and usually a paper is a story, right? So if it's a story that is digestible and makes sense and is and has ingredients that help other researchers or clinicians to understand or to better base their decisions, be it diagnostic or treatment decisions. So if you feel that's enough material, then that's okay. And there is no general rule for this, I guess. At least I don't know one. During the section results, is there a specific order of presenting text and tables, graphs, or you can begin with either? Well, I would usually begin with text, and then there's that separate process where you think about what should be a table, what should be graphs. So text can be very boring. If you enumerate things, then that calls like, oh, maybe that's better in a table. Like patient characteristics should rather be in the table, not the text. And graphs, well, one advice is if you have really nice graphs, work on the graphs, and maybe there is somebody who can help you with that if you are an expert in your field, but that doesn't cover illustrations and graphs, then it might be reasonable to get somebody on board who can help you with the graphs. because nice graphs are catchy and they improve your chances of your paper being accepted. A specific order, coming back to the exact question here, a specific order, there is no specific order, but it would be a surprise to me to see that the results start with a table of graph. So usually there would at least be a little bit of text there. And then you are free to, mostly there is a table and next, I guess, but there might be other, there's no strict rules for this. Okay, so here's another question on citations. So you write a sentence and there are several relevant articles that all would deserve to be cited, so to say. How do we choose one of them and not 10 or 5? I would follow the suggestion of our colleague here and use the more relevant journal. I actually would encourage you to use an article from that journal that you want to send your paper to, if one of the references of the possible references is from there. And yeah, it would rather be the more relevant journal. You might go by the higher impact factor. Yes, that is something that I do. That's what I follow, and it actually, the answer was already in the question here, which is great. Next one, what typical factors need to be considered when deciding on choice of journal? Readership. So where would you expect your paper to appear if you would find it in literature? What would you expect? Would it be in a biochemical journal, or a clinical journal, or in a methods journal, or and that is the one way? And then I check all the journals that are options, and I sort them by impact factor. And if I know, oh no, that will never be accepted by clinical infectious diseases, let's say, then I don't need to go down that route. If it's something where you believe that they may accept, and if they don't, they might send it off to Open Forum of Infectious Diseases, to stay with the example. Now that's a good journal. So so think of the downline of the recommendations that publishers, the journals that don't accept your paper might recommend to you, so that you could factor in as well. What is the acceptable level of plagiarism and how to calculate? It depends on the kind of plagiarism. So if it is that some articles are being flagged because that abstract was presented at some conference, now that's not plagiarism. Yeah, that doesn't make sense. So that 30%, because of these, like listing drug names or something that is of course always immediately flagged. So in that range, 20 to 30%, then it's flagged, and then the editor would have a look at the and if that is not plagiarism because it doesn't come from one or a very limited number of sources, but from 25 different sources, then it's just that the AI program behind it was artificial, but not that intelligent, and you need to check that, to have that checked by a human. Yeah, so I said somewhere in the discussion section, or what I said about the discussion section, I said that we do have, we don't cite authors. That is, we don't cite the name. We don't say Zimmerman, Smith, Miller, et al. Said whatever in their study. They said this and that. That's somewhat unusual, and I don't care who said this. Okay, I want to know what has been said, and that is why I said we don't write down the author names. Of course, we cite authors and we cite papers. That's the whole thing. That's what it's all about in the discussion and in the introduction. sessions, but I just don't write the name of these authors. Thank you for pointing that out. That was causing a misunderstanding. Okay, there's something. There's a really long text here. I'm not sure. No, it's just an example. So name it all, and then in parentheses 2019 found this and that. Yeah, I think it's not necessary. You can save on that word count and save these 4 words, and instead just have a citation, so a number, or that's all. I wouldn't say it's wrong, but it's just it's not needed, and it counts into the. For information that is commonly known, I love it. So how far back do you have to go to cite from initial source if citing commonly known information on, say, Penicillin and Fleming's publication may not be readily available? They are readily available, and go back all the way to the 19 whatevers on 20s or so on Fleming's Penicillium notatum. I'm sure they are there. You can Google them, you will find them. And I would really go back to the original source. Automation. How do you reformat references to journal style centrally without manually adjusting each reference? Well, that is with reference manager programs. That's otherwise there is no automatic way. How can I get waiver and APCs for very good journals, as our lab doesn't have any fundings for research articles? Yes, you need to discuss with the journal. We just have such a case at mycosis, and where we have exactly that discussion. And I'm convinced that the journal will find a solution. Otherwise, if you are working with journals where they are owned by a scientific society, that might be easier than industry-owned journals, or it's a publishing industry, right? So, how and when to choose a suitable journal? For example, medical mycology versus mycosis versus mycopathologia. Well, it's of course always mycosis, and so it depends on whether the journal already had a paper on exactly the topic recently that might influence their willingness, and then I go by impact factor. If it's very easy, right? And top down. The journals that go beyond publishing articles in open access model. How do you deal with financing the publication of the paid articles? Yes, that is deal with. I'm not sure whether I exactly understand. So either it is what I just addressed a minute ago. I guess it is. Otherwise, please type again. How do you create files showing the difference between an older and a newer version? Yeah, well, with track changes, I think that that should be part of all the text programs, and certainly so in Microsoft Word. Track changes is the English word for this, and yeah, that is a double, and some academic institutions recognize corresponding author different from first author. Is this universal? No, it's not, but it's actually really very much local. So it's institution by institution. What I use for grammar checks? Well, the inbuilt, I just switch it on. And it does grammar checks, and it goes beyond spelling, of course. Kind words here. Thank you very much. That's then how would you put a list of shared author, and how do we inform the journal editors about this? Oh, you just place an asterisk or some other flag to those who are sharing a position, who are equal contributors. And then just below that line where all the authors are, you add on the title page of the manuscript, you add that same, that explanation, say, these authors contributed equally, and the editors will see that. That's a nice one. How much time should normally take it to write an original manuscript from scratch through the end normally? Well, it depends on how many you have written already. So it's like a muscle. You will improve over time, and so that is very difficult to say. What we do with original articles is that we produce so usually we follow a plan, and that means that we already have written the introduction. Then we run the study. And once the study is done, then of course more has been published in the meantime. So we have to integrate that into the introduction of the plan that we started with. And then we may need to cut it down so so that it certainly doesn't have more than one page. And so that's the one thing where you can use material that you planned that study with. And what we then always do is that we do the tables, listings, and figures first, and then we write the text. So maybe that helps. And there is no given number of hours there. If you are stuck and it doesn't flow, you have that block, and it doesn't really move forward, and it's time to talk to colleagues. Not to professionals that help you with mental issues, but you just go for, you say, oh guys, I'm really stuck, so can you take over last author or somebody else from the group and help me? How do I get out of this of that situation? Now there is a recommended reading for me. Thank you very much. I will do so later on salami publications. Okay, that sounds like least publishable results. There's a long one. Give me a second to read it. Now there is somebody who's working on the bachelor thesis and it's not working, or the results are not, there is not the expected results. Whether I have any suggestions how to write about the respective parts and start addressing this problem. It's certainly what we should do, not write only about the successes, but the failures as well, because that is how we learn and how we can help others to learn and get forward. So the problems, of course, if there is not enough material then for your bachelor thesis, to stay with the example from our colleague, there should be a plan B. When you start your thesis, there must be a plan by the supervisor on how to react if there is what's the exit strategy if the plan, if it doesn't work. So you can't just send anybody home and say, well, bad luck, but your bachelor thesis is not going anywhere. It can't even be a bachelor thesis, so that should really not happen. So ask for a plan before you even start with a bachelor or master's thesis or doctoral thesis. What happens if everything goes south? So what happens then? And that needs to be clarified at the beginning. Yeah, there's another one on on these crazy charges and sums of money that journals are asking for these days, or some journals, not everyone, but more and more so. That really is that is really a problem where I don't have a solution to. There are all these project deal and whatever they are called. So usually, if you are based in a low and middle income country, then usually there should be waivers, or not waivers, but it should be per se clear that you are not being asked to pay a huge amount of money that might be possible in high income countries. I don't have a solution for that. Maybe we should go on social media and address it so that we are all heard, because that is not what we should. It should not be that you can't publish because you don't have the money, the 3, 4, 5,000 that might be asked for. You might be charged for open access or actually for just publishing. Last question here. How could we choose potential reviewers? Because journals might ask you, who are potential reviewers? Well, I'd say that potential reviewers, don't choose reviewers from your own country, because that doesn't have a lot of credibility, okay? And so think about who works in the field, who's knowledgeable in the field, and who's maybe not the absolute top person in the field because they won't have time to review, which will then make the processing just slower. So that is what you would be my advice here. Okay, that was the last question in this row. I see that there's a raised hand. I'm not sure what to do with a raised hand, actually. And quite some were already answered by the team. Thank you very much. And I hear, no, I can't do anything with the raised hand. So I would say enough for today. I hope you liked it. And the session was recorded, so it will be on one of our websites, and Accelerate Likely, and it will go on YouTube, and we will link it. So it will be easy to find for those who were not here. I'm really actually pretty enthusiastic because there were so many people joining. I don't know the exact number. The team knows 210. That's really cool. Thank you very much. So maybe we repeat it someday, and could use some of your questions to improve that presentation. And if we repeat it, we'll put one figure in. Thank you very much for joining today. And I hope you have a great week. Bye.